The first thing Clara Bennett felt was pain, sharp, searing, and endless. Not fear, not confusion, just the pure burn of it spreading through her leg. Her breath came in short, ragged gasps. Dust clung to her tongue, and the torn hem of her dress was soaked dark with blood. Somewhere behind her, the sound of gunfire still echoed faintly through the valley, rolling like faraway thunder. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. She tried to crawl forward, but her body refused. Her thighs screamed each time she moved, the pain so deep it made her vision flicker. The sky above her was an unbroken sheet of pale blue, too bright, too still. She thought of her students waiting at the little schoolhouse near the Wyoming line, the chalkboard half cleaned, her lesson plans folded neatly inside her trunk. She had promised she'd be there by Monday. Her bonnet had fallen somewhere along the trail. Now it lay beside her, half buried in mud, crushed under her hand. Tiny ants moved across the fabric, but she didn't have the strength to brush them away. The air smelled of sage and gunpowder. She remembered how it started, the shouting, the driver yelling for her to run. Two men had stepped from the brush, eyes wild with hunger and whiskey. The wagon had flipped when the first shot hit. Clara ran until she fell, tumbling down a rocky slope that tore her leg open. After that, everything had blurred, moonlight, trees, and pain. Now the sun sat high, pressing down hard. Sweat and blood mixed on her skin, gleaming in the light. She pressed her palm against her thigh. The wound throbbed under her touch, hot, swollen, angry. Her stomach turned when she saw how bad it had become. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, half to herself, half to the sky. "Someone please." A sound broke the stillness, the snort of a horse. Clara froze, her heart hammering. A shadow moved between the trees, tall and steady. A man. He dismounted, boots crunching softly against the dirt. For a moment, her chest tightened. Was it one of them? He stepped into the light, broad shoulders under a worn shirt, a rifle slung behind him, dust clinging to the brim of his hat. His voice, when it came, was low, calm. "Easy now," he said. "You're hurt bad." The smell of leather and whiskey surrounded him. She saw his eyes, steady blue, sharp but kind. "My leg." She managed, her voice trembling. "It's swelling fast." He knelt beside her, jaw tightening as he looked. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're right about that." He pulled a canteen from his belt and poured water over his hands before touching the wound. The coolness made her flinch. "If we don't take care of this soon," he said quietly, "you won't make it past tomorrow." Her pulse quickened. She didn't know who he was, but something in his calm tones steadied her. "Who are you?" she asked faintly. "Name's Ethan Cole," he said, wringing out a cloth. "Just a man passing through. You're safe now." He wet the rag again, pressed it gently to her forehead. "Stay awake if you can." Clara tried to focus, tried to hold on to his face. The sunlight blurred around his outline. "You came from a trail?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "Bandits, they shot the driver. I ran." Ethan's jaw clenched. He scanned the ridge, eyes narrowing. "You're lucky you made it this far." The horse shifted behind him, restless. The wind carried the scent of dust and pine sap. Ethan checked the wound again, then looked at her, his expression turning firm. "We'll need to clean it," he said. "It's bad, real bad." Clara's lip trembled. Am I going to lose it?" He met her eyes. "Not if I can help it." He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bottle. The sharp smell hit her before she saw it. "Whiskey. This'll burn like hell," he said softly, "but it'll keep you alive." She let out a shaky breath. "You sure you know what you're doing?" Ethan gave a faint, weary smile. "Been through worse. Back in the war, I learned a few things." He poured the liquor straight onto the wound. Clara cried out, gripping the dirt, the sound breaking in her throat. Ethan's hand steadied her shoulder. "Breathe, ma'am," he murmured. "Just breathe." When the worst passed, he tore a strip from a red bandana and tied it around her thigh, firm and clean. Then he crushed some dry herbs between his palms and mixed them with water. "Old medic trick," he said. "Yarrow and comfrey. They'll draw the heat out." She stared at him, tears shining in her eyes. Why help me? You don't even know me. He paused, glancing toward the trees before answering. Out here, no one lasts alone. For a moment, the world felt still again. The sound of the river drifted up from below, cold, endless, unbothered. Ethan tightened the bandage and met her gaze. You're going to make it, he said quietly. I'll see to that. The breeze shifted. The scent of sage rolled through the valley, and somewhere far off, a hawk cried. Clara closed her eyes, clutching the red bandana around her leg, praying that this stranger's voice wasn't just another dream. The sun was sinking lower, spilling gold light through the trees. The air buzzed with insects and dust. Clara could barely keep her eyes open, but she fought it, afraid that if she let go, she wouldn't wake again. Ethan sat beside her, cleaning his knife with slow, deliberate motions. Every so often, his gaze drifted to her face, then back to the horizon, scanning for movement. You're lucky I found you, he said quietly. Another hour, maybe 2, and the fever would have taken you. She tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He handed her the canteen, steadying it as she drank. Water dripped down her chin, cold against her burning skin. Thank you, she whispered. Ethan nodded, still watching the tree lean. You from around here? South Pass, she murmured. I teach school there. Or, I was supposed to. He gave a small smile. A teacher, huh? Haven't met many out here lately. Takes guts to build a life this far west. I thought so too, she said faintly. Until today. He chuckled softly, the sound low and tired. Don't lose that spirit. It's the only thing that keeps decent folks alive out here. For a while, neither spoke. The valley held its breath, as if even the wind was listening. Clara studied his hands, rough, sunburned, lined with small scars. The hands of a man who'd worked hard, maybe fought too many times. But when he wrung out the cloth and placed it on her forehead, his touch was careful, almost gentle. Why were you riding alone? She asked after a moment. He hesitated, then looked down. Not much choice, he said. Spent years fighting in places I'd rather forget. Came back to a house that wasn't mine anymore. Figured the land didn't want me settled. Clara blinked at him, her exhaustion mixing with curiosity. So you just kept going? He gave a slow nod. Sometimes moving's easier than remembering. His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Clara turned her face toward the mountains. The shadows had stretched long and blue across the ground. She wanted to tell him about the children waiting for her, the ones who wrote her letters with crooked spelling and shy hope. She wanted to tell him she wasn't brave, not really, that she ran because she was scared, but her lips wouldn't form the words. Ethan leaned back against a rock, his hat tilted low. You should rest, he said. I'll keep watch. She watched him for a moment, the set of his shoulders, the way he sat between her and the open valley like a wall against the world. You don't have to stay, she whispered. He glanced over, one corner of his mouth lifting. I know. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of rain and pine. Clara's eyes fluttered shut, her breathing shallow. Ethan stayed still, listening to her uneven breaths, to the whisper of the land. He'd seen too many die in silence to ever take life for granted again. When the first drops of rain hit the dirt, he moved closer, spreading his coat over her. She stirred, opening her eyes just enough to see the outline of him in the dimming light. You'll be all right, he said softly. I'll make sure of it. Her fingers twitched, brushing the back of his hand. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't gratitude. It was something smaller, something that didn't need words. A reminder that she was still here, still human, still fighting. Ethan's jaw tightened. He looked toward the trees, where twilight bled into night. Somewhere out there, danger was still waiting. But for now, his world had narrowed to one thing. A wounded schoolteacher clinging to life under a silver Wyoming sky. He adjusted his rifle beside him and whispered to himself, Not tonight. Not while I'm breathing. Night crept over the valley like smoke. The last traces of daylight faded behind the ridges, leaving only the soft orange flicker of the campfire. Clara slept fitfully, her face pale against the shadows. Every so often, she muttered something, half a word, maybe a name, but it dissolved into the night before Ethan could catch it. He sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his lap, hat low over his eyes. The fire snapped softly, throwing small sparks that drifted into the dark. He wasn't really resting. Men like him never did. Now and then, he checked her wound, touching the bandage just enough to feel the heat beneath. It was still warm, but not burning like before. That was something. He let out a quiet breath. A coyote called far off. Then silence again. The land was too still, too quiet. He didn't like it. Sometime after midnight, a noise cut through the hush, a twig snapping where no animal should have been. Ethan froze, his hand tightening around the rifle. He heard it again. Faint boot steps on dry dirt. He moved quickly, dousing the fire with his boot and grabbing his hat. The night closed in fast, heavy and black. Clara stirred, confused. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Stay still," he said softly. "Don't make a sound." The voice that followed was rough, mocking. "Evening, stranger. Mind sharing what you got in that pack?" Ethan's jaw clenched. He knew that voice. Two men stepped from the trees, rifles hanging loose, eyes sharp in the fire's dying glow. Same faces he'd seen before along the trail, the kind that fed on weakness. Ethan stood, calm but ready. "Ain't much worth taking," he said evenly. "Just a woman who's been shot, and some supplies. You best keep riding." The taller one sneered. "A woman, huh? Maybe we'll check for ourselves." Ethan's thumb rested lightly on the hammer. "You take one more step," he said, voice flat, "and you'll regret it." They laughed, though their voices wavered. "We just want food," the smaller one said. "Times are hard. Don't make this worse." "Then turn around," Ethan said, before hard turns to dead. For a breath, nobody moved. Then the taller one's hand twitched toward his belt. Ethan fired. The shot cracked like lightning through the canyon, the bullet hitting the dirt inches from their boots. Both men stumbled back, eyes wide. "That was your warning," he said coldly. "The next one don't miss." The silence afterward was deep. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. The two men backed away, muttering curses, vanishing into the dark. Ethan didn't lower his rifle until he could no longer hear their boots. Then he turned back toward Clara. She was trembling, her eyes wide. "You didn't shoot them," she said softly. He shook his head. "Didn't need to. Mercy travels faster than bullets sometimes." She stared at him, confused, maybe even in awe. "You're a strange man, Ethan Cole." He smiled faintly. "Maybe, but you're still breathing. That's what matters." He knelt beside her, checking the bandage again. The cloth was damp from the rain, so he replaced it with a dry one, his hand steady despite the tremor in his chest. The smell of gunpowder still hung in the air. "Try to rest," he said quietly. "They won't be back tonight." But he didn't believe that. Not really. He'd seen the hunger in their eyes, the kind of emptiness that didn't quit. The fire crackled low, throwing soft light across her face. Clara's breathing steadied. Ethan leaned against the rock again, rifle beside him, eyes fixed on the black line of trees. He'd been alone for years, drifting through this wild land without reason. But now, for the first time in a long while, someone needed him, and that meant something worth fighting for. As the night deepened, he whispered under his breath, "If they come again, I'll be ready." The stars stretched endless above them, cold and silent, as the Wyoming wind carried the smell of sage and rain across the sleeping valley. By dawn, the air had turned heavy and wet. Mist clung to the trees like ghosts refusing to leave. The fire had burned out, leaving only pale smoke curling through the gray light. Ethan rubbed the sleep from his eyes, or what little he'd gotten, and turned toward Clara. Something was wrong. Her face was slick with sweat, her breathing uneven. When he touched her forehead, it burned hot, feverish. The red swelling around her thigh had crept higher overnight. He pulled the bandage loose and cursed softly. The wound looked angry, swollen tight under the skin. "Clara," he said, his voice low but urgent. "Hey, you with me?" Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy and dazed. "I can't feel my leg," she whispered. "It hurts everywhere." Ethan swallowed hard. He knew what that meant. Infection. He'd seen it before, on battlefields, in camps, in the faces of men he couldn't save. There was one chance, but it wasn't a kind one. He took a steadying breath. Clara, listen to me. If I don't drain this, you won't make it through the day. Her eyes widened. Drain it? You mean? I mean, it's the only way, he cut in. I know what I'm doing, but it's going to hurt bad. Worse than anything you've felt yet. Her hands trembled as she tried to push herself up. No, please. I can't. Ethan caught her wrist gently but firmly. Clara, look at me. She did, and what she saw in his face stopped her fight cold. Not pity, not fear, just truth. I've watched men die slow because no one had the guts to do what had to be done, he said quietly. You're not going to be one of them. Not if I can stop it. Her throat tightened. You'll really help me? He nodded once. You're not dying out here. Not on my watch. The silence that followed was thick. He took out his knife and poured whiskey over the blade, then held it near the flames until it glowed dull red. The metal hissed in the air. Clara turned her face away, whispering a broken prayer under her breath. Ethan's voice softened, but it carried steel underneath. Bite this, he said, handing her a folded piece of leather. And hold on to something. It'll be over quick. She clamped down, tears spilling before he even started. Ethan pressed his palm to her knee, steadying it, and then the blade touched skin. Clara's muffled scream ripped through the canyon. Birds scattered from the trees. Ethan worked fast, his hand sure despite the sweat rolling down his temple. The knife bit deep. Thick yellow fluid spilled out, mixing with blood. The smell was sharp, metallic. He didn't stop, not until the pressure eased. Then he pressed a mix of crushed herbs into the wound and wrapped it tight with a fresh bandage. Clara's body shook, her breath coming in harsh, shallow bursts. He took her hand, gripping it until the tremors slowed. Stay with me, Clara, he said softly. You hear me? Keep your eyes open. She blinked weakly, voice slurred. Ethan, it hurts so much. I know. His voice broke a little. I know it does. But pain means you're still fighting. Don't let go. Minutes dragged by long and brutal. Finally, her breathing steadied, her face relaxing as the fever began to drop. Ethan exhaled, shoulders sagging. He sat back against the rock, wiping blood and sweat from his hands. You did good, he murmured. Real good. She stirred faintly, her voice barely there. You saved me. He looked at her, his eyes tired but gentle. Nah, you saved yourself. I just held the line. For the first time, a faint, shaky smile touched her lips. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his fingers trembling just a little. Rest now, he said. I'll keep watch. But even as he spoke, he caught something, a rustle in the distance. The faint crunch of boots on damp earth. He stiffened. The men from last night. They'd come back. He reached for his rifle, loading it with quiet precision. His voice was barely above a whisper as he looked at her sleeping face. You fought to live, he said. Now it's my turn. The wind had changed. It carried the smell of wet earth and something heavier. Men. Ethan knew it before he saw them. Years of war had carved that instinct deep into his bones. He crouched low beside the rocks, his rifle cradled close. Down the slope, two figures crept through the brush, their boots silent on the wet ground. The same two he'd scared off the night before. Only this time, they moved with purpose. Hunger, revenge, or both, it didn't matter. Ethan's eyes hardened. You should have kept riding, he muttered under his breath. He glanced back at Clara. She was still, her breathing shallow but steady. He tucked the blanket tighter around her shoulders, then rose, quiet as the mist itself. When one of the men stepped closer, Ethan's voice came low and calm. Drop the gun. The man jerked, eyes snapping up. Hell, he's still here. Ethan fired a warning shot that split the dirt near his boots. Next one won't miss, he said. The second outlaw barked a laugh, though his voice shook. You think you could take both of us? You're outnumbered, cowboy. Ethan's tone didn't change. Ain't the first time I've been outnumbered. But you won't like how this one ends. The men exchanged a glance. Then the taller one, stringy hair, cracked lips, took a half step forward. We just need the horse, he said. Ours ran off last night. You can keep the woman. Ethan's eyes turned cold. That horse stays. She stays. You walk away. The shorter man sneered. You ain't got the nerve. Ethan lifted the rifle slightly. Try me. For a breath, the world held still. The wind brushed through the sage. A hawk circled above, crying out once before the silence dropped again. Then everything happened fast. The taller outlaw reached for his pistol. Ethan fired. The bullet tore into the man's sleeve, spinning him sideways. The other lunged forward, shouting, his boots sliding on the slick ground. Ethan swung the rifle, striking hard across the man's jaw. The sound of impact echoed like thunder. Both men went down. One tried to crawl toward his gun, but Ethan kicked it away and leveled the barrel. His voice was steady, cold enough to freeze the air. "You move again," he said, "and I'll send you where you sent that wagon driver." The taller one groaned, clutching his arm. "You don't have to kill us." "I know," Ethan said, his voice quiet now. "That's the only reason you're still breathing." He tied their wrists with rope from his saddlebag, his motions efficient but rough. When he pulled the knots tight, one of the men winced. "You're gonna pay for this," he spat. Ethan crouched beside him, eyes sharp. "Son, I've already paid for worse." He dragged them toward a nearby tree and secured the rope to the trunk. "You'll sit tight until I find someone to haul you out. You run. I'll find you first." The men didn't argue. Their silence said everything. When Ethan turned back toward camp, his breath slowed. Clara was awake, watching him. Her eyes, clearer now, though tired, met his. "You did it," she whispered. He wiped his hands on his coat. "Had to. Some folks only understand the language of fear." "You didn't kill them." "No," he looked away. "Killing's easy. Living with it isn't." For a moment, neither spoke. The rain had stopped. Mist rose off the valley floor like smoke, curling around them. Finally, Clara's voice broke the quiet. "Why risk yourself for me? You could have walked away." Ethan met her gaze, something raw flickering behind his eyes. "Maybe I'm tired of walking away." He sat beside her, the rifle laid across his knees. The weight of the morning pressed down between them, heavy and unspoken. Clara reached for his hand. Her fingers were small, trembling, but warm. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded, staring into the distance. "Don't thank me yet," he murmured. "We're not safe till we reach South Pass." And with that, he rose, scanning the horizon again. The sun was breaking through the clouds, but he knew daylight didn't always mean safety. By afternoon, the clouds rolled back in, dark and thick, the kind that promised trouble. The air smelled like rain and iron. Ethan had built a small fire again under a rock ledge, trying to dry Clara's soaked blanket. She sat against his coat, pale but more alert than before. "How bad's it look?" she asked quietly. He glanced at her wound. "Could be worse," he said, though his eyes said otherwise. "The fever's down, but you'll need real medicine soon. There's a town half a day west if we ride steady." Clara looked at the trail ahead, the wild stretch of rock and fog that seemed to go on forever. "You think I can make it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He met her eyes instead, steady and sure. "You don't have to think you can. You just have to try. I'll do the rest." She gave a faint smile, the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "You always talk like someone who's seen too much." He chuckled under his breath. "Because I have." For a long moment, they listened to the wind push through the pines. Then Clara said softly, "You were a soldier, weren't you?" Ethan's shoulders stiffened. He didn't look at her. "Used to be," he said. "Now I'm just a man with too many ghosts and not enough sleep." "What happened?" she asked gently. He poked at the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Lost good men. Lost worse ones I didn't mean to kill. Came home to an empty house and a folded flag on the table." Clara's throat tightened. "Your wife." He nodded once. "Fever took her and our boy while I was still out fighting. By the time I made it back, the town had buried them. Folks stopped looking me in the eye after that." The silence that followed was sharp. The wind hissed against the rocks. Clara's hand trembled as she reached toward him. "Ethan, I'm sorry." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Don't be. Life doesn't ask for fairness. It just keeps on moving." "But you still help people," she said. "You helped me." He looked at her then, really looked, and his voice dropped lower. "Because I couldn't help them. You understand? Every time I see someone bleeding, I see my boy's face. Every time I hear someone pray, I hear her voice. Maybe that's all I've got left, making sure someone else gets to keep what I lost." Clara's eyes filled with tears. That's not nothing, Ethan. That's grace. He smiled faintly. Grace ain't a word I hear much. It should be, she said, because you've got it. He turned away, clearing his throat roughly. You talk too much for someone half dead. She laughed weakly. Maybe that's why I'm still alive. For the first time, he smiled without hiding it. The lines around his eyes softened, and something in him, something hard and old, cracked just a little. Then thunder rolled overhead. The sound made both of them turn. From beyond the ridge, a faint echo of horses reached them. Several, not just one. Ethan rose quickly, pulling his rifle close. Stay low. Her eyes widened. Is it them again? Maybe. Maybe not. He scanned the horizon. But either way, I'm not taking chances. Moments later, a voice called out from beyond the fog. Steady, official. Cole. Ethan Cole. Are you down there? Ethan's grip eased a little. Deputy Howe, he muttered, relief sliding through his tone. About damn time. The riders came into view. 3 of them, all wearing dust-stained badges and weathered hats. Howe dismounted first, tipping his brim. Heard shots echoing through the valley. Figured you'd be in the middle of it. Ethan gave a short nod. Got too tied up under that pine. Tried to rob and kill a woman on the trail. Howe's eyes flicked toward Clara. She alive? Barely, Ethan said. But she's tougher than she looks. Clara tried to smile, though her voice cracked. That's the nicest thing anyone said all week. The deputy grinned. We'll take the outlaws back to Lander. You ride in when you can. Doc'll see to her. Ethan nodded, relief and exhaustion mixing in his face. Appreciate it, Hal. The deputies rode off with the prisoners, their figures fading into the mist. For a while, only the fire crackled. Clara turned to Ethan, voice trembling. You stayed with me. You could have left when they came. He looked at her for a long moment. I've done enough leaving for one lifetime. She held his gaze. Then maybe it's time you stayed. Something in his eyes shifted, something quiet, like a storm breaking in the distance. He didn't answer, but the way he reached out to steady her said more than words ever could. Come on, teacher, he murmured. Let's go home. They rode slow through the foothills the next morning, the air sharp with the smell of wet pine and mud. The storm had washed the valley clean, leaving the earth glistening like glass. Clara leaned against Ethan's chest, half asleep in the saddle. Each jolt of the horse sent a dull ache through her leg, but she didn't complain. Every mile meant another breath, another chance at living. Almost there, Ethan said softly. South Pass should be just over that ridge. Her eyes fluttered open. You've said that 3 ridges ago. He chuckled low. Well, this time I mean it. The sound of his voice steadied her, like the rhythm of the horse's gait. She tilted her head slightly. You ever get tired of saving people, Ethan? He smiled faintly. Never said I was good at it. Just don't like watching decent folks die for no reason. You think I'm decent? She asked, teasing, her tone light, but her eyes searching. He looked down at her, serious now. I think you're tougher than most men I've known. And that's saying something. Her lips curved. That's supposed to be a compliment. That's the best one I've got. They both laughed softly, the kind of laughter that made the silence afterward feel safe instead of empty. But as the town came into view, her laughter faded. The small wooden buildings looked distant, fragile against the endless plain. She stared ahead, quiet. What happens when we get there? You'll rest. The doctor will take a look. I'll see you settled. And you? She asked. What do you do then? He hesitated. I'll keep moving, I suppose. Always do. She turned to face him fully, her eyes steady. You don't have to. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening. You don't understand, Clara. I'm not made for staying. Men like me, we don't fit in places like this. That's not true, she said, her voice firm. You just never gave yourself the chance. He shook his head. I gave it once. Lost everything. Ain't got the heart to do it again. Her hand found his on the reins, small and warm. Then borrow mine for a while. He looked at her, startled. There was no pity in her eyes, only quiet strength. You think I'm some kind of savior? He asked bitterly. I'm not. I've done things, ugly things, that don't wash off easy. I don't care about what you've done, she said softly. I care about what you're doing now. You saved me when you didn't have to. That means something, Ethan. It means there's still light in you, even if you can't see it. He stared at her for a long moment, then finally looked away, his voice low. You got a strange way of talking, teacher. And you've got a strange way of living, she said. Seems like we even out. He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. You really don't give up, do you? Never have, she said. I've had too many people quit on me already. He nodded slowly, his throat tight. Guess we're both stubborn fools then. Guess so, she said, smiling faintly. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun was climbing high, turning the fields golden. The old schoolhouse stood crooked on a hill, paint peeling, windows dusty. Ethan helped her down from the horse, his hands rough but careful. This the place? He asked. She looked at it for a long moment, her eyes wet. Yeah, she whispered. This is where I start over. He nodded once. Then I'll see you through the door. As he helped her walk, the sound of their boots against the porch boards felt heavier than words. Clara leaned on him, steadying herself. You know, she said softly, you don't have to leave right away. He hesitated, looking out over the plains. If I stay, it'll only stir things up. Folks like me, we're reminders of things better forgotten. She reached out, touching his arm. Maybe that's why you should stay. So people remember what decency looks like. For the first time, Ethan couldn't find an answer. He just looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the ache that had lived inside him for years began to quiet. Clara smiled faintly. You know, you never told me what you wanted out of all this. He thought for a long moment before answering. Peace, he said simply. But I reckon I wouldn't recognize it if it came. She met his gaze. Then maybe I'll help you learn what it looks like. The words settled between them, warm and heavy. For once, Ethan didn't argue. He just nodded, slow and thoughtful. Maybe, he said quietly. Maybe you will. Weeks passed. The snows melted early that spring, and the hills around South Pass turned the color of new wheat. Life settled into a rhythm that neither Clara nor Ethan had expected, but both quietly needed. Every morning, Ethan brought water from the well and stacked wood by the schoolhouse steps. Clara, her limp fading with each passing day, swept the floors and opened the shutters wide to let in the light. The first children arrived soon after, dusty-faced, shy, clutching old slates and pencils worn to stubs. Their laughter filled the air like something holy. Ethan never stayed long when the lessons began. He'd tip his hat, make some excuse about mending a fence or checking the horses, and wander down the ridge. But every afternoon, when the bell rang and the children scattered, Clara would see him sitting by the fence post, pretending to fix something that didn't need fixing. He never said it, but she knew he waited to make sure she wasn't alone when the world went quiet again. One evening, the sky burned gold behind the mountains. Clara poured 2 cups of tea and carried them to the porch where Ethan sat sharpening his knife. She handed him one, the steam curling between them. You ever think about leaving again? She asked. He turned the cup in his hands, staring at the steam. Every morning, he said, and every time I decide not to. Why? He looked up, eyes soft. 'Cause somehow, this place stopped feeling like a punishment. And that's new for me. Clara smiled, her voice quiet. Maybe that's what peace feels like. He laughed under his breath. You might be right, teacher. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of everything they didn't need to say. She sipped her tea, eyes on the horizon. You know, folks in town talk about you. Do they now? They say you're that war-worn drifter who finally found something worth staying for. He grinned faintly. They talk too much. Maybe, she said, but this time they're not wrong. Ethan looked at her then, really looked. The wind caught her hair, the same stubborn strands that refused to stay tied back. He saw strength there, not in the kind that fights wars, but the kind that keeps teaching children in a place that forgot how to hope. You saved me, she said softly. He shook his head. No, you gave me a reason to stop running. For a while, they just sat there, the teacher and the drifter, 2 souls who had both lost everything and somehow found enough to start again. When the sun dipped low, Ethan stood and looked toward the western trail, the one that used to call him away. It didn't call anymore. He turned back to her, and in that small, quiet moment, something inside both of them settled. Clara, he said finally, you ever wonder why we make it through the worst things? She thought about it, then smiled faintly. Maybe because someone decides to stay when everyone else walks away. He nodded slowly. Yeah, maybe that's the whole secret of living. Mercy, not strength. The wind rustled the sage, soft and endless. Behind them, the old-school bell chimed in the evening breeze. Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand. Come on, he said, voice low. Let's go inside before the tea gets cold. And for the first time in years, he didn't look back at the horizon. Moral lesson. In the wildlands where survival often meant choosing between mercy and violence, Ethan and Clara learned that real strength wasn't in the gun or the will to fight, but in the choice to stay, to heal, and to keep kindness alive even after the world had gone cruel. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is simply not walk away.